Thank you for joining us. My name is Victor, and I am a librarian with the Youth Services Department here at Sacramento Public Library. We are excited to welcome you to the STEAM Youth Leadership Program Series. This program is funded by the California State Library's Stronger Together initiative.
Today we have the opportunity to engage in conversation with Dr. Mikel Maria Delgado. She has a BA in Psychology/Statistics from California State University, East Bay, and a PhD in Psychology with an emphasis on animal behavior and cognition from UC Berkeley. She has worked as a postdoctoral fellow at the School of Veterinary Medicine at UC Davis, and her research has been published in academic journals such as Psychological Bulletin, Applied Animal Behavior Science, the Journal of Applied Animal Welfare, and the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, among other journals. Dr. Delgado is also the co-author of the book Total Cat Mojo, and her upcoming book Play With Your Cat will be published in 2024. She has been interviewed by the BBC, NPR, New York Times, Washington Post, Newsweek, and Scientific American. She is a certified applied animal behaviorist and a certified cat behavior consultant, offering services through her own consulting firm, Feline Minds. Before we begin our interview, Dr. Michael, is there anything that you'd like to share about yourself to the audience?
I would just really like to thank everybody for being here. I'm really excited to talk to all of you about whatever questions you have about science, grad school, animal behavior specifically, since that's my specialty. So if you have interests in animals, I'm happy to talk to you about all of that. But yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I'm not sure where you'd like me to begin. So yeah, just throw some questions at me.
Hi, Dr. Michael. We're happy to have you here today. My name's Mimi, and my partners are Elham and Nicole. So to start off this interview, simple question is, what made you interested in cats?
That's a great question. I've definitely, I guess ever since I was a little kid, I really loved cats. They were my favorite animal. I begged and begged and begged my parents to let me get cats. And my mom was allergic, so it took many years of me like bothering her before she finally broke down and let me get a cat when I think I was 15 or 16. I think what I've always liked about cats is just, I think they're really beautiful and they're interesting. They're kind of mysterious in a way. They're, maybe a little bit harder to read than dogs. But I think also they're just really like cute. And I love all animals, to be clear. I think to me, pets and like urban wildlife are really, for a lot of us, our only connections with other animals, and in some cases really with nature, depending on where you live and where you grow up or what kinds of activities you get to do. So I can't say that I was like one of those kids that knew like, oh, I want to be a veterinarian or I want to be a scientist. I definitely was not. But I think if I hadn't been so into cats, I would not have ended up being a scientist. So it kind of worked out for me that way.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So what sparked your passion to work in this profession? So obviously we know that you really like the cats, but what type of training did you have to go through to get this far?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I definitely wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna, be a cat behaviorist when I grow up. And, I'll admit I actually dropped out of college when I was young. So I did fine and I did well in high school, but neither of my parents went to college. So it wasn't like necessarily a priority for my family. And I started college and then wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. So I did, and I was also going into debt. And so, there are financial considerations. So I ended up dropping out of school, and I was growing up on the East Coast and I wanted to live in California. So I moved to California. And what I really wanted to do at the time was be in a band. And so I played bass guitar in a band for many years. And during that time, I had two cats, and one of them passed away about, I guess that was 23 years ago, maybe a little bit longer. And when he passed away, I still had another cat, but I was really missing having a lot of cat time in my life. And a friend of mine had started volunteering at an animal shelter near where I lived. And he was like, it's actually pretty fun. Maybe you should consider volunteering at the animal shelter. And so I did. I went with him to the shelter. And when I got there, I realized, like, I don't know if any of you have adopted a pet from an animal shelter or been in an animal shelter. Shelters are amazing places. They really do try to do the best they can for the animals that are staying there, but it's still a very stressful place, right? So these animals have lost their homes, or maybe they got picked up on the street. Some of them are sick. And now they're just all in this space. Sometimes they're in a cage. Maybe it's very loud there. People they don't know are coming in and out of the shelter. So it can be very stressful. And I was really drawn to the cats that were having a hard time adjusting to the shelter system. So if you've ever met a cat who is shy or maybe got a little worked up with petting pretty quickly, like these are behavior problems that in a shelter are not super helpful for cats. Like most people don't go into a shelter and say like, I want to adopt the scared cat that won't let me touch them. So there was actually a program at the shelter where volunteers could work with these, what we'd call special needs cats. They needed extra patience. They needed careful handling. They needed someone who was going to give them the time to kind of build trust and come out of their shell. And from that, I became very interested in behavior in general. So, I'd always loved cats, but I hadn't really thought much about their behavior. And I also hadn't thought about the reasons that animals end up in animal shelters. And, sometimes it's things out of their control, like their owner moves and they can't have pets in their new building. Or in a lot of cases, the pet has a behavior problem. So maybe the dog has bitten somebody, or the cat has stopped using the litter box. So I became very interested in not just the behavior of the cats, but also how their relationship with humans was affected by their behavior, right? So like how strongly people felt like attached to their pet. And that really kind of just turned into like, this is very interesting to me. How do I make this my life, right? And so I volunteered at the shelter a lot. Basically, eventually someone went on maternity leave and they needed someone to fill in for her while she was on maternity leave. And so they offered me the job, I think because I was just there hanging out all the time. They were like, okay, she seems interested, so we'll give her the job. And it just went well. And so on the job was really how I got the training. So when I was volunteering, they had a lot of training on like, different behavior issues and how to handle cats and how to read their body language and understand if their tail is swishing or their ears are flat or they're hissing or they're meowing or they're purring. Like, what do these things mean? So I got a lot of training as a volunteer. And then when I started working there, I also was working under people who are more senior than me that had more behavior experience. So that was kind of my initial training. And I worked at the shelter for about 8 years. So I was there for, quite a long time. And that was when I realized, I'd learned a lot, but I was recognizing that there were other ways I could learn about behavior. And one of those ways was to go back to college and actually study behavior. And, I think when we hear psychology as like a area of study, we think that's studying just humans, but it's actually really, there's a whole wing of psychology, the field of psychology that is dedicated to animal behavior and how animals think and solve problems. And so that's kind of where I got more into a scientific path. Was I decided to go back to school and kind of, try to grow up and, like prepare myself to do things in maybe a more formal way, because, working in an animal shelter, it was a great experience, but it can be a very stressful place to work. And you may or may not get paid enough to live on, depending on what your job is at the shelter. A lot of shelters just don't have a ton of money. So the pay can be a challenge. So I was interested in just kind of expanding my horizons and seeing what other opportunities there would be for me. And so I was living in the Bay Area at the time. And so I ended up going to Cal State East Bay, which is in Hayward, and finishing my bachelor's degree there. And that was good. I mean, it was definitely like, I started working in actually a pigeon lab while I was there. So there was a scientist faculty member who he studied pigeon cognition, which cognition is, thinking and memory and problem solving. So I worked with pigeons for a little while, and that was actually really fun. I was, of course, as soon as I got there, I wanted to like find out how we could make the pigeons happy. So we built them a little aviary where they could fly around and swim. And we made them a little bath and gave them puzzles and toys to play with. But I wasn't actually doing like my own research so much there as just helping with taking care of the pigeons and, running some of the experiments. And at some point, I decided that I would look into grad school. I didn't really know much about grad school because my parents didn't go to grad school. Actually, my mom did go to grad school eventually, but she was she was much older by the time she went to grad school. So she was kind of also what we call a re-entry student, right? So I was not young when I went back to college, and when I went to grad school, kind of like my mom. So one thing that really helped me is I found out about a program called the McNair Scholars Program. So if any of you are in college already or going to college, most campuses, I believe, have this program. And the whole purpose of the program is to help underrepresented students prepare for grad school, because you want to you need to have a plan. Like, you kind of need to make yourself a strong candidate for, especially if you want to get a PhD. So you can get a master's degree or you can get a PhD. And there's different programs in animal behavior for both. So if you decide you want to go into animal behavior, of course you could go to vet school. That's a separate kind of program. But McNair is really focused on helping students get into PhD programs. And there was a lot I didn't know, because it's a large percentage of people in PhD programs, their parents have PhDs. So if you come from a background where your parents didn't go to college, didn't get PhDs, there's a lot that you don't know that other people just assume everybody knows. Like, I didn't know that when you get a PhD, you actually get paid. So you get a stipend in exchange for teaching. So you don't necessarily have to go into debt to go to grad school, which I didn't know, because I was like, I need to probably start saving money so I can go to grad school. And then I found out, like, oh, there are ways you can get a PhD and not go into debt. And you also have to kind of plan carefully, like, where you want to go, not based on location. So I think a lot of times when we're thinking about going to college, we just think like, oh, I'll just go wherever's closest to me or someplace that I'd like to live. But with a PhD program, you're trying to find a senior scientist who you want to work with. So ideally, they should be studying something that is interesting to you, because you're going to be spending 4 to 7+ years studying that thing. So if you're not really excited about whatever that person is studying, you shouldn't apply to work with them, because you will probably be sad. So I already knew I wanted to work with animals, but that limits where you can apply, because I had to look for a grad school where someone was studying animal behavior. So I couldn't just apply to whatever university. I had to really narrow down my choices, because not every university has an animal behavior program. And I also knew I wanted to study animals, but I wanted to either study wild animals or companion animals like cats and dogs. I didn't really want to study lab animals anymore. I worked with the lab pigeons, and there's important reasons to do research with animals in a laboratory, and we weren't doing anything that was harmful to the pigeons, but I also feel like I preferred to study animals that kind of live in their natural habitat and study their natural behaviors rather than studying them in a laboratory. So that was kind of like limiting my choices for grad school. And that was one of the reasons that I ended up studying squirrels for my PhD. So I kind of took a little detour from cats to study squirrels for a little while. And so I studied fox squirrels. They're a common species of squirrels here in California. In Sacramento, we have 2 species of squirrels. We have gray squirrels and fox squirrels. But in Berkeley, which is where I ended up going to grad school, there's only fox squirrels. So they were my study subject for my PhD. Do you have any questions? Like, before I keep, I don't know if you have any questions so far.
I love the experiences that you shared so far. So, kind of moving on with that, could you please share more about those experiences in Health Food Cooperative, your involvement in Punk Band, and being a recognized expert in cat behavior and cognition?
Okay, yeah. And I guess like what I would say is maybe right now I don't know, maybe some of you are really struggling, like you feel like you have to choose what you're going to do for the rest of your life as soon as possible and make a decision. And I will just say that from my own experience, and this doesn't mean it's true for everybody, but I have had a few different jobs and, career paths. And like I said, I kind of got started in science late. And I think there were some like advantages to that, because when I went back to school, I'd already had a lot of jobs. So I kind of knew how to focus, and I kind of treated grad school like a job. I started at 8 or 9 in the morning, and I finished at 5 or 6 at night. I wasn't staying up all night doing, like, a lot of the younger students in grad school that I was working with were definitely not as experienced with like managing their time and kind of just, having a priority list of things I wanted to get done and kind of just getting it done. So, you know, for me, like life work balance is definitely important. Like I wanted to spend time with my boyfriend and my friends and my family and my cats. So I did try to just like be really well organized. So I had some previous jobs before I went to grad school. So I worked in a health food cooperative in San Francisco, which a cooperative is like a non-hierarchically structured workplace. In this case, we didn't have any managers. So it was a democratic workplace where everybody had a vote. And so when we made decisions, for example, we moved to a larger store, right? So we sold, you know, health food, you know, groceries like produce and bulk rice and pasta and like vitamins and dairy products and all that stuff. So we decided to move to a big location. We had to have like a whole meeting of everybody who worked there and come to a majority decision about like where we were going to move and how much money we were going to spend on that. So it was a really great experience in that you could kind of be as involved as you wanted to be. And so I got to do a lot of different jobs there that I didn't really have necessarily a background in, but because I worked there, I was able to learn from other people. And so I started off doing things like stocking shelves and working the cash register, but I ended up working in human resources. So I was like processing people's paychecks and helping them with their benefits and healthcare and stuff. So it was like a really cool experience as far as, like I said, being in this kind of non-traditional work environment. You know, most of us, when we have a job, you have a boss and they tell you what to do. Working in a cooperative is kind of like having 150 bosses because everybody has a say. And so in some ways it's challenging. In other ways, it was really great because you know, some of my best friends came from there and we shared, you know, similar interests in trying to bring healthy food to the community and be a community space, and also like make decisions as a group and not just let, you know, certain ideas get kind of, you know, trampled over because someone else said no. So it was a really cool experience for me. I really loved working there. And I think it did kind of maybe just made me a little more open to like more like a less traditional work experience. Okay, so that was working at the cooperative, playing in bands. So I was not like a trained musician. I really just wanted to like play music and have fun because I like music a lot. I'm a big music fan, and I'm into punk music, so I like the loud, fast stuff. And I just basically found some other women that one of them played guitar and one of them I was like, can you sing? And she was like, I guess so. And so we're like, okay, we're gonna start a band. And so it was really just an opportunity to be creative. And you know, I wasn't very good as far as being a musician when I started, but when you play with other people and you practice, you do get better. And then I tried to start bands with people who are better than I was, so I had to learn how to keep up with them. And I really just enjoyed again, like the punk culture is also kind of anti-authoritarian and like non-traditional and just questioning your values and like trying to work for a better world, whether that was, you know, through feminism or anti-racist activism or animal rights or whatever. There's a lot of different kind of like ideas in the punk scene. And so to me, it was just a really exciting space to be in. And it gave me some opportunities to like travel around the country. So like one of my bands, we went on a tour. We played in like people's backyards and we played in a lot of like bars and really tiny clubs and like just really interesting spaces. But we always got to meet people. Like we'd stay at people's houses. Like the person who put on the show would let us sleep on their floor for the night. So it was an adventure for sure. But by the time I went back to school, I wanted to focus on school. It was really hard to do school and do other things. So that's kind of when I stopped playing in bands, was because I knew I had to really focus on my education. And also it was getting hard to stay up as late as you have to if you play in a band. A lot of bars don't close until 2, and that was just a little too late for me. So my lifestyle was changing too. But I still play a little bit. Like I have guitars and I have an electronic drum kit. So I like to kind of just play around a little bit just for fun.
Thank you for your response. That was very interesting. I'm glad you're still able to incorporate playing music into your life. Since you were talking about businesses, what inspired you to create and co-found your business, Feline Minds?
Yeah, so that was really when I decided to leave the animal shelter. So one of the things at the animal shelter that we did was we had a hotline where people could call if they were having problems with their cat. It sounds kind of crazy, but that was like, we would get like 100 calls a month. So people would call like, oh, my cat's hiding under the bed, or, my cat's scratching my baby, or I got a new cat and now my cats are fighting. So it was really surprising how many people needed help with their cats. So when I left the shelter, one of the things I wanted to do was start offering more so when people would call the hotline, we would talk to them for like 15, 20 minutes, but often that wasn't really enough time. It's like, here's some basic tips to kind of get you started, but a lot of times people needed more help than that. So my coworker at the shelter and I decided to start our business, Feline Minds, where we could go into people's homes, see the environment, sit down with everybody in the family, talk about why their cat was having behavior problems, and help them come up with a plan to fix the problems. And to be honest, like, a lot of cats are well behaved and don't have problems, and it's not necessarily that people are doing anything to make their cats have bad behavior. I mean, sometimes it's the cat just wasn't very well socialized when they were a kitten, and sometimes, but a lot of the times it's just the environment is not very stimulating for cats. And I think when people have dogs, they kind of understand like their dog needs to go for a walk or their dog needs to play with toys. And a lot of times people think cats are low maintenance pets, and so they don't always provide them with things that they need. Another big issue is that, cats do behaviors that people might not like. For example, scratching the couch. So that's a big problem a lot of people have with their cats, but a lot of times they don't have anything else for them to scratch. And scratching is a natural behavior for cats. So if you provide them with a good scratching post that's sturdy and tall and a material they like to scratch, they're much more likely to use the scratching post than the couch. But if you don't provide them with a scratching post, then the couch is very attractive. So a lot of what I do to this day is really just try to educate people on what their cat's basic needs are and how to provide for those needs so that they can have a better relationship with their cat. So you, rather than try to stop your cat from scratching, you need to give them things to scratch that you're okay with them scratching. So not your couch. It's okay to not want your cat to scratch the couch, but you have to accept that they need to scratch. So in that case, you need to provide them with a few different things that they can scratch in the house so that you're basically directing their behavior in a positive way. So it really is just trying to help people understand, like, this is what it means to have a cat and live with them and help them, just have a better environment for their cat. And most of the time, that's really all the cat needs is like a better environment. But I was very surprised actually at how many people were having questions about their cat. I mean, sometimes it's a very serious problem, and then other times it's just they have a lot of questions. They don't understand their cat and they want to make their cat happy. So anyway, we started the business to offer home visits, and since then we've like during the pandemic we transitioned to virtual visits primarily. So we mostly do like Zoom calls with people, and we have them do a video tour of their home so we can see the environment and see their cat. But yeah, it was really just to kind of expand what I was learning about in the shelter, and recognizing that there was a need for people to get more detailed help than just like a 10-15 minute phone call. They needed kind of more like a 1 to 2 hour session. So it can take quite a while to work with people.
So yes, so I believe that most of those amazing experiences that you added to your books. So you're a co-author of the book Total Cat Mojo and your upcoming book Play with Your Cat. I believe it demonstrates your commitment to educate cat owners. So what was the inspiration to write these books, and what message or important pieces of information were you hoping readers to get from these books?
Yeah. So the first book that I co-authored, actually a friend of mine was writing a book, and he knew that I was getting a PhD, and he wanted to make sure that, the content in his book was science-based and like not just his opinion. So he asked me to help with the writing of the book. So I wrote a lot of the content that was more science-based. And so Jackson Galaxy he has a TV show about cats, and he's kind of a semi-cat celebrity. And when you work in this field, like most of us that work with cats know each other, especially if we've been doing it for a while, because there's not a lot of people that really focus on cat behavior. So he and I have known each other for a while. And so he was like, oh, are you willing to help me write this book? And I was like, sure. So I was writing a lot of the content that was kind of the science behind what he was writing. So it was really about making cats happy and meeting all of their needs, and kind of like a guide to living with cats. My book that's coming out, so my book's coming out in March, and it's really focused on one aspect of cat behavior, which is play behavior. And I'm very interested in play behavior because, well, one, there's all animals play. So if you look throughout the animal kingdom, even bees play, cows play. And when I was working with squirrels in grad school, we definitely saw squirrels playing a lot. So all animals play. So then the question becomes, why? Like, it probably has some benefits. If it's seen throughout the animal kingdom, it's been retained throughout the process of all these species evolution to continue playing. And there's different theories about the benefits of play. But one of the theories is that it allows you to practice behaviors that you'll need as an adult. So when you're young, you might practice behaviors that would be similar to fighting with another adult, like if you need to fight for your territory, or hunting, if you are an animal that's a predator. And for cats, play behavior really is all about hunting. And if you don't know kind of how we became friends with cats, cats have been domesticated for, they estimate around 10,000 years. And cat domestication really started when humans started living in stable communities where they stored food. So we were storing grain. The grain was very attractive to rodents, and the rodents were very attractive to cats. Cats like to hunt small rodents. So basically, humans are living, we've got food, there's rodents, and then the cats are like, hey, this is cool, there's lots of rodents here. And then the people and the cats kind of become friends. It's like, oh, they're cute, they're nice. And so the cats who were nicer probably kind of became more likely to be cared for by the humans. So they got extra food, and then they became healthier. They were able to make more kittens. Their kittens were more tolerant of being close to humans. And, fast forward thousands of years, and now we have cats as pets. But we have not changed a lot of cats' behaviors during the process of domestication like we have with dogs. So those of you who have dogs, you probably especially if you have a specific breed of dog, like a lot of breeds of dogs have been kind of molded by humans to do certain behaviors pretty reliably, right? Like some dogs fetch, or they will herd other animals, right? They like to, the herding dogs like to, they would naturally be herding sheep, but they might herd, another dog or humans instead. We haven't really done much with cats' behavior. Not that we haven't changed them at all, but they still all have this instinct to hunt. Now, most of us recommend keeping cats indoors because it's safer for them. Then they can't, get hit by a car. They're not going to kill birds. But at the same time, we haven't changed their need to hunt. And so for me, playing with your cat with interactive toys, so that's like a stick with a string and something hanging off the end, or a stick with feathers, is a way to give cats an outlet for hunting behavior. So this is a very long explanation for why I got inspired to write this book, which is really about so it's kind of half the science behind hunting behavior and play and how they're related in cats, and just understanding how cats hunt. For example, they are what we call stalk and rush hunters, which means that they sneak up on their prey, and then they kind of wait until the perfect moment to pounce on them. So other animals like dogs are ambush predators, where they'll chase their prey until their prey gets tired and then they overtake them. So that's not how cats hunt. So if we understand how cats hunt, then we can understand better how to play with them. So half of the book is really about hunting behavior and play behavior and the science behind play behavior. And then the other half is more tips on how do you pick a toy for your cat, and how do you move the toy, and what time should you play with your cat, and how many minutes do you need to play with your cat? Do you need to play with them every day, right? So kind of the more helping people with the actual action piece, where they're using playtime to have a better relationship with their cat or make their cat happy. So that's what the book's about.
Thank you so much. Yes, I guess that's a lot of new information that I just learned, because I have a cat, and that's just so much better to learn now. So, and also I have read all of you, most of your amazing articles, but one of them that got my attention was the article called "Cats Cafe Can Be a Force for Good." And talking about is talking about the global trend that cat cafes are becoming popular, mostly in Taiwan, and it spread it in Japan and Europe, and now it's like a very popular thing in the United States. So, what was your opinion about the concept of cat cafes and how they became popular worldwide, and particularly in the United States?
Yeah, so I think there's actually a cat cafe that maybe is opening in Sacramento. I know they started, but then the pandemic happened, so I don't know what happened in the meantime. But cat cafes are interesting because, well, they're attracted to people, and the goal is usually to get cats into new homes. The main issue I have with them, so I think they can be totally fine. They can be run very well, and they can be clean and, fun for the cats, and as long as they have safe spaces. The concerns that I had at the time and that I still have about them is, one, not all cats love living in groups. So I think people have maybe heard like cats are solitary or antisocial, and that's not really true either. So what's complicated is just that cats are very flexible socially, and that flexibility can depend on their early life experiences. So if they grow up with other cats, then they may be more tolerant of other cats later in life. There's probably some genetic component to how tolerant they are of other cats. And of course, it depends on the cats. So just because your cat likes one cat doesn't mean they'll like another cat, right? Just like you might not like everybody you meet, right? You like click with some people, and then other people just like, yeah, they're fine. So with cats, there's just a wide range of behavior when it comes to being social. But we know that they can form groups. And when they do form groups, they tend to be related females. So you'll see colonies of cats that form. They tend to be related females and their offspring. And they also tend to be in places where there's either a lot of natural prey, so a lot of mice, or there's human provided food and shelter. So places where there's a lot of resources. So we know that in order to help our cats in a home environment live in a group, like maybe a much smaller group, for example, I have 3 cats, we have to have a lot of resources for them. So we have, you can see one of my cats on a cat tree behind me, but we have a few cat trees, and we have, a few scratchers, and we have different beds everywhere. And so that allows cats to kind of choose to not share if they don't want to. So they can kind of coexist more peacefully when you have lots of stuff. So if you want to have a cat cafe with, 10 or 20 cats in it, you need to have a lot of space. You need to have a lot of like cat trees. You need to have a lot of litter boxes. You need to have a lot of food bowls. And so it just requires a lot of careful planning. And then you have to make sure that the cats that are there are actually happy and doing well, because if they're not doing well, I can tell you from working in an animal shelter that when a cat is stressed, they don't get adopted very quickly because they usually don't show themselves to be very friendly. And it's very sad because, even a lot of us, our cats wouldn't do well in a shelter, right? And our cats might be very sweet at home, but you put them in an animal shelter and they're very stressed, nobody's going to want to pet that cat. So, the goal is to get cats adopted. So usually the kind of cats that do well in a cat cafe are very tolerant or friendly with other cats. They tend to be young, active, interested in people, and like confident. So they do well at being in a strange environment with a lot of people coming in, because that's the other part of cat cafes is you have people coming in and drinking coffee and hanging out, for an hour or two. So it's always kind of a steady stream of strangers coming in and hanging out with you. So I think that there's definitely some benefits to cat cafes. I think a lot of people think like a shelter is depressing. I get that, like nobody wants animals to live in cages for a long time. I think one of the animal shelters, I think it's this, I can't remember if it's the Sacramento SPCA or the Bradshaw shelter, has a cafe space inside the shelter, which I thought was a really nice way to kind of ensure that the shelter cats are getting attention and let some of the cats who like other cats get the spotlight, and then also let people come in and have coffee and hang out in a cute space. So I think there's definitely some reasons to consider it, but you do have to be careful. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that a lot of people thought like, oh, it'd be cool to open a cat cafe, but they didn't really understand how to run an animal shelter. So there's like certain things you have to do as far as like the air ventilation and like sanitization, so you prevent the spread of disease, because a lot of cats that come in, from the street or from an animal shelter might have picked up an upper respiratory infection or parasites. And so you don't want to bring those animals in and then get all the rest of the animals that you have sick. So you really do have to understand kind of the medical and preventative care that these cats need, as well as just like you need to have like a proper ventilation system. So you can't just like be like, oh, I'm going to open this space and put 20 cats in it and everything's going to be fine. So I think where I've seen cat cafes not do well is when they don't apply the principles that have been developed through veterinary, like the UC Davis has a really good shelter medicine program. So that's really focused. It's a veterinary program that's focused on how to run an animal shelter to minimize disease and how to treat animals and keep them happy and prevent stress, because stress can cause a lot of illness too. So I think you just need to, do your homework, and you can do it well, but not everybody does.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of information in that. So I also read an article that you wrote titled "A Survey-Based Assessment of Risk Factors for Cross-Sucking Behavior in Neonatal Kittens." And so I just wanted to ask, what brought up your attention to inspire you to conduct research on the cross-sucking behavior, and what was the process like collecting data with hundreds of kittens?
Yeah, when I was at UC Davis, so after I finished my PhD, some people do another research position called a postdoc. And so that's kind of a more independent project. So when you're a grad student, you have an advisor, and you often are studying something related to their research. So my advisor at UC Berkeley studied squirrels, so I studied squirrels. When you do your postdoc, you get to be a little more independent. And I was at the School of Veterinary Medicine at UC Davis, and I knew that I wanted to do research with cats. And UC Davis has a student-run group called the Orphan Kitten Project. And these are all vet students who run this rescue group. These are kittens that are often accidentally separated from their moms. So maybe mom got hit by a car, or we had one case where mom gave birth at a construction site and she left and didn't come back. I think she was just too scared because there were too many people around. So the people found these like 2-day-old kittens that needed to be rescued because they were going to die if they didn't get cared for. And then sometimes people find kittens. So they might be in a park and they hear meow, meow, and then they see little tiny kittens. They don't realize that mom has gone off to get food. So mom still has to hunt to survive if she's, a wild kitty on the street. And so she's coming back, but the people didn't realize she was coming back. So they took the kittens to a shelter. So the problem with rescuing or taking these little kittens off the street is they are not able to care for themselves. So a kitten who's just a few days old actually needs to be bottle fed every couple of hours. It's like around the clock, or they will die. So they are very labor intensive. They need a lot of care, and they can be very fragile. A lot of them do die if they don't have, even with mom, some of them will die, but when they don't have mom, they're at higher risk of dying. So they need a lot of care. So the students at UC Davis, well, basically someone calls like, I just found some kittens. So they take them in, they find a foster home for them, someone who's willing to get up at 2 a.m. to feed the kittens and take care of them and clean them and basically care for them until they're ready for adoption. So they have this amazing program. They rescue up to 300 kittens a year, I think. So when I got to UC Davis and learned about the Orphan Kitten Project, I realized that there was a potential pool of research subjects here, because these are kittens who have experienced an unusual event, right? So most kittens don't lose their moms. Like they're a very small percent of the kitten population. But there could be parallels with early life stressors, for example, in humans. So there's a research program that was run with Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control called the ACEs study. And ACEs are adverse childhood experiences. So that's ACES, adverse childhood experiences study. And they were very interested in, with humans, the effects of early life experience on later outcomes. So if you experience different types of stress or trauma as a child, how does that impact your life later? So we were kind of interested in looking at the same thing in kittens. So how does it affect kittens to be separated from their mothers, especially if more and more people are rescuing them? Do we have to be worried about their health or their behavior? Do they grow up to be typical cats, like without behavior problems? Are they more prone to behavior problems? Are they more prone to health problems? Like, is this something we should be concerned about? So I was working with a student, and she had fostered lots of orphaned kittens. And so she was talking to us about some of the common behaviors that she'd experienced. And one of them that she'd observed in a lot of kittens was cross-sucking behavior. And basically this is where the kittens start nursing on each other's bodies, like whenever they're together. If kittens are with their moms, they will nurse huge percent of their time. Even if mom's not producing milk, they will nurse just for the comfort, right? So it's just like when you're a baby, right? You like to be held by your parents or your caretaker, like you have that bond. And for kittens, the same is true. Like they depend on mom to keep them warm because kittens can't regulate their body temperature until they're 3 weeks old. So there's this heavy reliance on mom to care for you, but now mom's gone. And so maybe you have your litter mates. You still have the urge to nurse. And so a lot of these kittens start sucking on each other's bodies. And sometimes it can be dangerous because they can cause sores from the nursing. They will often nurse on each other's genitals. And so so kittens, when you're caring for them and you're hand feeding them with a bottle, you have to stimulate them with a little moist cotton ball afterward on their bottom. And that's how they go to the bathroom. They can't go to the bathroom on their own yet. When their sibling is nursing on their bottom, the sibling ends up ingesting urine and feces, which is not good for anybody's health. So this whole conundrum of the kittens nursing on each other can cause health problems for both kittens and really represents the impact of losing their mom when they're too young. And the need to nurse is still there. And even if they're getting bottle fed every couple of hours, that's not the same amount of nursing that they would experience if their mother was with them. And, I think the bigger question is whether or not we know there's short-term risk. So again, if a kitten is ingesting a lot of urine and feces, they're probably not going to thrive because they should be eating formula or milk. And the kitten who's being sucked on is often getting injuries to their body because their litter mate is nursing on them so intensely. What we don't really know is whether or not this leads to adult behaviors that are problematic. I was unable to do research that would look at animals into the future. That was kind of my plan if I got funding to do it, but it's a very complicated, it's difficult to track kittens throughout their life. So, it's one thing when you have a foster caretaker and a rescue organization, but once they get adopted, you have to contact their adopter and ask them if they'll participate in research, and you just naturally get a lot of drop off. So if you want to study a large number of kittens into the future, you probably have to start with thousands of kittens and then hope that, a small percentage of the people will stay in touch with you and give you updates on their kittens' behavior. But I think there's a lot of really interesting potential research questions there that I didn't have time to answer during my time at UC Davis. So I think there's just still so much that we need to know. And we did do another study that showed that orphans showed more signs of stress compared to kittens who were reared with their mothers. I don't know if I can share my screen, I could show you a video of one of our studies. I don't know if that would be interesting to you all. Is that possible? Would you want to see that?
Yes, that would be a very good, we would like to see that.
Okay, Victor, I think you need to enable screen sharing. Let me get that video ready. So what we were, I'll explain the study in the meantime. But basically what we were doing was we had kittens who were orphaned, and then we had kittens who were living with their moms. And what we wanted to do was see how they responded to a minor stressor. So we took each kitten and put them in a playpen for 2 minutes alone. So they were being separated. So if they were with their mom, they were being separated from their mom and litter mates. And if they were without a mom, then they were just separated from their litter mates because all of the kittens either had litter mates or they had mom and litter mates. And then we wanted to see how often they would do 2 behaviors which were indicators of stress. So vocalization. So when young animals are distressed or they're separated from their mom, they often cry, right? I'm sure all of us can think of a time where we were out in the store and suddenly we lost track of our parents and we started screaming. So other animals will do the same thing. And they do it because when they start crying, we have a urge to go rescue them, right? You hear a kitten crying, you hear a baby crying, something in your brain says oh, I must go take care of you. And then activity, if you're a kitten and you're lost or you're separated from your mom or litter mates, there's an urge to find your way back to your nest. So what we did was we took orphaned kittens, put them in this little playpen, as you'll see, for 2 minutes. And then we took mother reared kittens and put them in the playpen. And so you'll see the differences between their behaviors. So I'm going to share the video. Okay, so can everybody see the video?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so here's a mother-reared kitten. So there's the playpen. And we changed out all the, puppy pads and cleaned everything between kittens. And here's the orphaned kitten. I guess you can't hear, here's the sound. This kitten is meowing a lot. But you can also see that the kitten is more active than the mother-reared kitten. So we did find that the orphans were more active and were more vocal than the mother-reared kittens, which is a indicator of stress. And someone at UNAM in Mexico recently did an updated version of this study where they used 9-week-old kittens, and they found the same thing. Those kittens were also more active and vocal when they were separated. So it seems like that stress continues at least until kittens are 9 weeks of age. So whether that continues into adulthood, again, we need more science to find out, but it is an interesting finding that these kittens basically did show signs of stress. We tested kittens at 1 week and 3 weeks of age. And then, like I said, the folks at UNAM in Mexico tested the kittens at 9 weeks of age. So there are some effects of being orphaned that could be negative for kittens. And so then the question becomes, well, how can we help them so that they are less stressed? And so that's, again, future research for some of you possibly to consider if you want to study kittens. Yeah.
Okay. It was wonderful listening and hearing about your area of work and all your research. So to conclude this interview, what advice would you have for the audience, specifically the younger audience who may be interested in pursuing this type of career, working with animal behavior and specifically cats that don't know where to begin? Or do you have any life lessons that you would like to share?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think if you're passionate about working with animals, there's a lot of ways you can do that. So you can become a veterinarian, of course, or a veterinary technician. You can work with wildlife. You can work as a dog trainer. You can work in an animal shelter. You can work in a zoo. You can do something like I do, which is help people with their cats. So the tricky thing is, like, there's not necessarily one clear path. And I think that's a plus and a minus. Like, the minus is just like, I can't say like do X, Y, and Z, and then you'll, be whatever you want to be. That said, I think any experience you can get working with animals, whether it's volunteering or working, so a lot of shelters or even veterinary clinics will hire students to do things like help with like cleanup and caring for animals. So that's always a good way to make sure you actually like working with animals, is like the hands-on part. Because, the part I didn't talk about is, working with kittens, there's a lot of diarrhea. I'll be honest, there's a lot of poop. So some people really have a hard time with it. Certainly, if you're going to work in a vet clinic, you might want to make sure you're comfortable. Like, actually, I knew a veterinarian who ended up going into behavior, but she was really squeamish about needles. I was like, how did you become a veterinarian if you're squeamish about needles? So you have to know kind of what you're comfortable with. I'd say for the work I do, I work a lot more with cats owners than with cats. So sometimes I talk to people and they're like, oh my God, you must love working with kittens all day. And I'm like, no, I'm actually talking to cat owners all day. And often they're like angry at their cat or sad. So, it can be challenging in other ways. So, a lot of animal jobs involve working with humans. So it always helps if you also like working with humans. Most people, luckily, who like animals are also nice, but it is sometimes, I think, more human facing work than people recognize, right? Because a lot of times I'm not only talking to cat owners, but I might be, giving a lecture about cats, or I might be talking to a journalist about cats who has questions. So having people skills helps. You can get around it a little bit, but it's good to be comfortable with that. I will say, certainly if you want to get into science and you want to get into science, there's no need to like wait. Like, just because I dropped out of college, I'd say don't there's times where I'm like, I kind of wish I had gone to college and finished earlier, because I maybe would have had different opportunities than I have now, just being the age I am and kind of like trying to catch up on like career stuff. But yeah, I'd say the big thing is trying to get hands-on experience working with animals, and then, talking to people who do the kind of work you're interested in. Most of us are more than happy to talk to people if you have questions about like, where are some programs where I can learn about dog training, or where can I, because sometimes you don't need well, the other thing is, do you need a degree to do what you want to do, or do you need a grad school degree to do what you want to do? Or are there other programs, right? So there's like programs where you can learn how to train a dog and be a dog trainer without necessarily going to college. The advantages of going to college are, it does open doors for you. I definitely will say having a PhD has helped me, because when people want to talk to an expert, they like it if you have certain letters after your name and certain credentials. So so it does open doors to have that education. I will say that. But it's not the only way. I certainly know people who, work with animals who don't have a PhD, and they do very well and they're very happy. But I do have some different opportunities, because when people want an expert, they want someone who's got a doctor before their name. So, and doing research, if you like it, is really fun. So the other thing I would say is, certainly if you're in college or when you get to college, is ask some of the faculty if they need help with their research. So you might have an opportunity to work in a lab and learn about the research process, because there's a lot to it. And, it's not just petting kittens. It is like learning how to do statistics and learning how to code stuff on a computer. Or, I did a lot of video coding for my research. It was very tedious. Or you might get to do, like I got to do some DNA analysis when I was in grad school, which was pretty fun and different, and not what a typical psychology major would have done. But, I wanted to look at how related the squirrels were that I was studying. So I did some DNA analysis, and I had to, learn and collaborate. So collaboration is also really important. You don't necessarily have to know how to do everything yourself. When you're doing research, the best research is when you have a team of people, and you have one person who's, really good at statistics, and one person who's really good at genetics, and one person who's really good at behavior. And then you do this really cool collaboration. Everybody learns something from it. And so I think, again, it's that the human element is very important. And I think just something to know about academia too. If you decide to go to college, grad school, there's something called imposter syndrome. And so I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's the feeling that, you're a fake. People are going to discover that you don't deserve to be there, and that you're really stupid, and they're going to kick you out. And everyone feels that. I mean, I experienced it a lot in grad school, because, again, my parents weren't PhDs. I was older than everybody, and I didn't go to like a fancy college. Like, a lot of people who go to grad school at UC Berkeley had gone to Harvard, and like, I don't know, they all went to fancy schools, and I'd gone to Cal State East Bay. So I felt a little like, do I deserve to be here? Maybe I'm really too stupid and should not be here. So I had a lot of moments like that. And then I realized that everybody else was having them too. And so that helped, because I realized I wasn't alone in feeling that way. And then I did realize that I did deserve to be there just as much as everybody else. It's, getting a PhD is half being smart enough and half just working hard. So you don't have to be a genius. Like, I'm not like amazing at math, but I can do stats and I can program stuff on a computer. I learned all that stuff during grad school. So I think, if you really want to do something, just like be open to trying new things, take some risks, and also, make sure you're taking time to take care of yourself and like be happy. And hopefully you'll enjoy the experience. Like, I really loved grad school. It took me 7 years to finish my PhD, and it was partly because I was slow, but also because I didn't want to end. It was really fun. Like, I really enjoyed the process of doing science, and I worked with a lot of undergrads during my time there, and I liked mentoring students. I enjoyed teaching. So it was really just a fun time for me. And I know not everybody has that experience. And the other thing I'll just say is that academia is not immune to all of the problems that you face in your everyday lives. So there's, still a lot of problems with like lack of representation and lack of diversity and inclusivity and all that stuff. So there are other challenges that you have to also be ready to like face. I mean, I definitely like heard things that surprised me and shocked me. And, it was just surprising at times, like how unwelcoming an environment it can be. But again, you can find other students with common interests, common background, and find like a little cohort of people that can support each other, and that will help as well. So it can be great, and it can be bad and everything in between. But if you find that you really love doing science, I think it is a really fun place to be for at least a short period of time.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Our conversation has been very insightful. And now I'll transition the Q&A to Victor.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you so much for answering these questions for us, Michael. Now I open the room for any of our remaining, the rest of our cohort. So if anyone would like to ask additional questions, Michael is ready to answer them.
One question that I have is, what is the most interesting cat behavior that you learned about?
I think, well, something that I get that I've seen, I don't know if you've seen this in the news, cats that like to carry things like from neighbors' houses into their home. So like stealing clothes off the neighbor's clothesline, and or even in your house, you might notice your cat carrying objects around in their mouth. The reason it's interesting to me is that there's well, cats aren't, like I said, I told you before, like dogs have been bred to retrieve, like, with a soft mouth, they'll go get a dead bird and bring it back to their human. That behavior is not documented in cats. And it's not, I think sometimes people think if their cat brings them something that they're trying to feed them or take care of them. And we don't think it's that either, because only female cats take care of kittens. And so, but also male cats will carry items around and bring things home. So that is, I think, it's a pretty interesting behavior. Why cats carry things around in their mouths. Anyone else?
Thank you so much for the question, Rosa. Would anybody else be interested in asking other questions to Michael?
I have a question. Hi. I have a question, and it's on the matter of graduate school. So what would you say is important to know if you want to do graduate school?
Yes, I always recommend that my students that I was mentoring first, like, think about what topics you're interested in researching. It doesn't have to be super specific. It could just be animal behavior, right? You don't have to necessarily say, I want to study sexual selection in birds or something, it could just be broad, animal behavior or animal welfare. So first, look at who is publishing on that topic in the past few years. And so you can go into Google Scholar and type in animal behavior and maybe limit the search to the past few years and see which faculty names come up over and over again. So you have to do a little like cyber stalking of faculty to find out who's studying what you're interested in. And so I encourage people to have like a spreadsheet. So it's like, here's Dr. So-and-so at this university, and this is what they study. Oh, they study the behavior of snails. Okay, this person studies, conflict between crows at this other university. So then you can kind of know who's studying what and where, and start narrowing down where you might like to apply. Because you're not going to just say, oh, I want to go to UC Davis. Although UC Davis is a great place to go if you're interested in animal behavior, because they have an animal behavior department. Just plug for UC Davis. But if nobody at UC Davis is studying what you're interested in, say you want to study therapy dogs. Well, nobody at UC Davis is studying therapy dogs, so you're not going to find a faculty member to take you as a student. So it's different in that when you apply to undergrad, you're applying to a college, but when you apply to grad school, in many ways, you're applying to a professor. And so I will just say from my own experience, because I applied to UC Davis, there was no faculty there that was studying something that was a good match for what I wanted to study, and I did not get in. So I did not get into UC Davis for grad school. And so that would be my advice, is just, do some research and find a few different faculty who are studying things that interest you and email them. It can be intimidating. You don't have to write a lot, but you can just say, my name's Grace. I'm a student at so-and-so. I'm interested in graduate programs in animal behavior, and I learned about your research in snails. Are you taking new students next year? And so by asking them if they're taking new students, you're finding out if you have a chance of being even considered for grad school. Because the other thing that's tricky about PhD programs is just the faculty member needs to have funding for new students, and they need to have like the time and space for a new student. And so I did have an undergrad who applied to a faculty member, and they really wanted to work with this one faculty member, but they didn't get in touch with them beforehand, and the faculty member was basically retiring. And so they didn't get to go to grad school that year because they only applied to one school, and the faculty person they had thought they would get to work with was retiring, so they weren't taking new students. So you just don't want to spend a lot of time and effort in putting a graduate application together if there's no chance that you're going to get in. Because if there's no faculty there to advise you, you probably won't get in. Now, the same is not true of a master's program. So master's programs are a little more like undergrad. So if that's something that you are like kind of more interested in a particular location, or you want to do a shorter program, not necessarily do a PhD, then a master's program can be an option. The other thing you should know is that if you want to get a PhD, you do not have to get a master's degree first. So I do not have a master's degree. I got a bachelor's degree, and then I just went straight to the PhD program. So it's not a requirement to get a master's first. Yeah, I could probably say a lot more. And also, like, I'm happy like to chat with any of you at another time. If Victor wants to give you my email address, that's totally fine if you have questions later. But I would say the main thing is like do a little bit of homework and think about like what topics are interesting to you, and find out who's been publishing research on those topics recently, because that means they're still active in the science scene, they're not retired, and better chance that they might take new students.
Thank you for answering my question. A lot of information, a lot of interesting information.
Thank you, Michael. Does anyone else would like to ask Michael another questions before we finish this conversation? So this concludes our conversation with you, Michael. Thank you for joining us today in conversation with members of our cohort and share your personal journey as a Black, Indigenous, and Latinx STEAM professional.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.